Greetings, friends. What are you learning today that will help you better serve God? All right. I'm reading from a book here called The Power of Maturity. It's an original first edition work by Rabbi Louis Binstock, B-I-N-S-T-O-C-K. How maturity can help you develop your human potential to the fullest in love, marriage, business, and every other activity in your life, okay? This is a subject that we don't talk a lot about, maturity. How mature are you? I don't mean how many years have you lived in this world. I'm not talking about your chronological age. How mature are you for your particular age? If you're 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, how mature are you in comparison to your peers? The author of this book says, maturity, like a precious gem, has many facets, many directions from which it sheds its beams upon our lives. Later, we shall set forth many particularized definitions of maturity. You can see already how many volumes we speak when we say maturity is not a state of being, it is a state of becoming, unquote. To complete the frame in which to hold this entire general concept of maturity, we may now add, quote, maturity is to be found in dealing wisely with the phenomena of existence. Let me repeat that. I like that. Maturity is to be found in dealing wisely with the phenomena of existence. In other words, how well do you cope with reality? You're living in this world. You're troubled by many things: finances, death, disease, destruction all around you, wars going on, the constant bombardment of negativity in the news and the media and the lies around you from your supposed neighbors and friends or even your enemies. How do you deal with that? How do you exist in a world of deception and lies, of hypocrisy? How does a mature man or woman cope with reality? All right? With the phenomena of existence. It's significant that man has been endowed with a longer period of infancy and childhood than any other animal or creature. Yet, he is far more complex than any other creature. As Shakespeare said, quote, what a piece of work is man, unquote. Yeah, man seems to need the extra time he takes to grow into an adult. Not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as well. Yeah, think about it. The animals mature pretty quickly, don't they? They're usually weaned from their mama's breasts fairly early, and they're out on their own, hunting and surviving within the first year. But you can't do that as a human being. It might take you 16 to 20 years to mature enough to where you can get out on your own and support yourself. And even then, too many young adults are living at home, supervised by mommy and daddy, unable to develop into the man or woman God wants them to be. I remember my grandfather, he used to tell my great-grandmother to kick me out of the house because I was living at home, going to school. I went in the Marine Corps after high school, and then I went to college. I was learning. I was enjoying myself. I always had jobs, part-time jobs, but I never really made enough money to support myself. I didn't even pay rent. My great-grandmother didn't require it, and I didn't even offer it. I saved my money, the little money that I made, I put it into books, into education, into learning. And I never really made a lot of money in my younger years. But my grandfather, now he had to mature in a way that I didn't, and that most young people don't. I think his father passed away when he was about 15 or 16, if I recall correctly. And he grew up on a ranch or a farm, and he had to support his mother and take care of his brothers and sisters. I think he had one sister and two brothers. One of them died, I believe, in a mental institution. But he was a handyman. He knew how to fix things. That's something I never really took up after him. I took more after my mother, her creativity, her ability to write poetry and short stories and literature. I love that. And my grandmother was pretty much the same way. She wrote poetry, and I did enjoy photography. My grandfather loved that part too. But, everybody matures at a different level. We know that. Some people mature really early. Some 20 to 22-year-olds are very mature, as well as some teenagers in their early teens, 14 or 15. They're very mature for their age. And then there are those in their 30s and 40s that are not that mature for their age. They haven't done a whole lot with their life. And you ask yourself why. A lot of it has to do with their lack of applying themselves, their lack of setting goals, their lack of reading, their lack of associating with mature companions. They just drifted through life, going pretty much nowhere. And when they get into their elder years, they find out that their retirement isn't even enough to support themselves because of their work history. They find out that they didn't really think about their later years in life. They wasted much of their life, okay? And I wasn't that wise with time management when I was younger. When you're young, you think you'll never die. You know you will intellectually. You know someday you'll die. You see death all around you. There's graves, there's cemeteries, and there's the death of your friends and loved ones. But when you get older, you really start thinking about it, or at least you should. You look back on your life and you go, wow, I should have been redeeming the time, as St. Paul said, for the days are evil. I should have been more productive. I should have been reading more. I should have been applying myself, But it's never too late, as long as your heart beat, as long as you're still pumping blood, as long as you have conscious existence. You can start doing something about your maturity now. Stop making excuses. The author of this book says there's very little you can do for your maturity during the first stage of life, infancy. During that period, the maturity of your caretakers, parents, friends, the family, physician, or older siblings help in forming you. However, at the second stage of life, which begins at about 7 years of age, your own maturity begins to show itself, sometimes with surprising strength. In the third stage of life, which begins at about the age of 14, you are competent to take almost complete charge. And in earlier days, when people died much younger than they do today, you might have begun to consider yourself an adult. In the fourth stage, being over 21 and enriched with education, you are quite capable of applying your maturity to a considerable portfolio of problems. At 40 or so, as you enter upon the fifth stage of life, you have had considerable education, including informal education and experience, and you should have a good grip upon your affairs. At 60 years of age, when you begin the sixth stage of your journey of the years, you are gathering in many fruits of your long planting and tending. You should have a clear vision of the final part of your journey, of the journey, too. And you can plan it, or rather you can plan for it with assurance. And at the last stage, say when you're about 75 years of age, you still are growing, becoming, but you know how to bring your earthly voyage to a wonderful, or rather successful, peaceful conclusion. For with maturity, you made it good all the way. We're talking about human maturity now. The creature who calls himself man is too complex to be entirely consistent. So in examining this maturity that everyone praises, this maturity that can do much toward helping us conquer life's problems, a puzzled reader may well say, how can you depend on it? How do you even know when you see it? Again, someone has observed, quote, I often think that the entire concept of maturity is just a fraud, that there are no people over 14, only long-term children buried in wrinkles and pomposity. I think that I myself am only a makeshift adult. with stilts inside my long pants and manhood painted on my face, and that suddenly these trappings will drop away and expose the little fellow underneath with his finger in his mouth. Still, there are times when I do feel really grown up, but it is as though it just happened, as though I had just experienced some singular bar mitzvah, attained some thundering new majority attained so far by no one else. Quote, unquote. How are you doing in your life and in your maturity? Do you consider yourself mature for your years? Let's talk about intellectual maturity and spiritual maturity and physical maturity. I matured physically at a rather above average age. I didn't reach adolescence until I was 14, almost 15, a little later than average, I would say. I knew a guy in high school, I won't mention his name, but he could grow a beard at age 12. I do recall somebody who, if I'm not mistaken, he was in the Guinness Book of World Record, and I think he grew a beard probably at age 4 and died at age 7 of old age. But that was a physical abnormality. But yeah, he was mature chronologically, way beyond his years. He had some type of a disease. I don't know what you call it. But spiritually mature, I mean, when I was younger, I came to a realization, a spiritual awareness at age 14, I believe. 14. And I began to read the Bible and study it and learn a lot. Boy, I thought I was one with God until I realized later on that I was just a sinner. A sinner that believed he was saved by grace. I'm not so sure I really was, but I had a lot of head knowledge, but I wasn't really spiritually mature. I used to talk about being spiritual, and my mentor, my Sunday school teacher, Doug Summers, he was a wounded Vietnam vet. He's about 11 or 12 years older than me. We talked about spirituality, and I used to think he was really spiritual, and there was certain people that were spiritual. And but really, spiritual in that sense, in a biblical sense, I think it means godly. You know, it's a little different. But getting back to this book here, The Power of Maturity. Let me read what it says in the book jacket. The author gives sane and sound advice to parents and others, or rather, and often with a chuckle, as if your son decides to become a house painter, don't drive him into distraction by insisting that he should be a portrait painter, unquote. He has a lot of down-to-earth stories. One person said, "This is a wise and wonderful book for all of us who need to know ourselves and others a little better. Maturity is defined in all its aspects by the author who examines what it is not, and then, using the aphorisms of Marcus Aurelius, applies it to specific areas of human life." The first chapter of this book is like aroma coming from the kitchen. It hones your appetite for the feast to follow. It is a do-it-yourself book. You can become your own analyst and have more fun, unquote. Yeah, so I haven't read the whole book. I'm going through it right now. It's not a long book, about 150 pages. He says right here, self-control applies as well to the control of one's temper. Let's talk about maturity and self-control. You can note in many a person that the inability to control desire, whether for a super large handful of goodies or for some more grown-up treat, is often coupled with the inability to control emotion. He talks about bringing up the matter. Now bringing the matter up to the human state, we see something of nearly the same mature, or rather the same nature occurring, at least with children. That keen observer Epictetus, Epictetus, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. It's Greek. He describes the situation and gives us a useful moral when he says, quote, when children thrust their hands into a narrow jar of nuts and figs, if they fill their hands, they cannot get them out again. Then they begin crying, and tell them to drop a few nuts, and they'll be able to get out the rest. And tell them also to drop their desire. Do not demand too much, and you will attain. A lot of wisdom that. So, you have a lot of desires. You have a lot of desires, a lot of goals, but you cannot attain to them. It's like putting your hand in a jar full of candy and you try to pull it out. You can't. Why? Too many treats, too many goodies in your hands. Let go of some of those goodies, those treats, and your hand will come out of the jar easily, right? So drop some of your goals, drop some of your desires, your fantasies, your wishes, and you can attain some of them. See, I always had the problem of being too spread out. I was a little bit ADD and I had a lot of interests, but I was going in different directions at once where I needed to focus. There's strength in focus. It's like a river going into different areas, right? That water is not very powerful when it's just spreading out all over the land. But if that river is going in one narrow channel, it's very powerful. The stream is very, very strong so that you cannot cross it necessarily. It's going to take you downstream with it. And I remember an incident when I was living with my foster parents. I was about 14. I was in 8th grade, and my foster father wanted me to cut my hair. See, my long hair was kind of a source of pride to me back then. I'd just gotten out of juvenile hall for hitting a counselor, running away, and doing a bunch of bad stuff. I had this long hair, and I was in 8th grade going to a school called Waverly. And there's only 2 other boys that had long hair. It wasn't as long as mine. And I remember they wanted me to wear a hairnet to help out in the kitchen, serving food, and I wasn't going to wear a hairnet, no. So that got back to my foster father. The principal must have called or something. And my social worker, he wanted me to cut my hair. I was going to run away over such a silly thing as that. Why? Because of pride. I wasn't willing to cut it just to conform to other people's standards. But eventually, rather than running away over something ridiculous, I cut it. Not too short, but I did cut it. And then later on, I remember my foster father offering me the opportunity to work with him at the National Guard serving the Army officers. I had to cut my hair again. Okay? Not like I did when I was in the Marine Corps, not that short, but I had to cut it, and I got over it, But I was immature, you might say. And that was a phase I was going through. Now I had a cousin that had longer hair. He probably kept it long quite a while. I don't know if he ever really cut it very short, but when I lived with my aunt and uncle, I never had long hair. They wouldn't allow it. It was always, this was back in the 60s. I always kept it pretty short. It wasn't until I got into Mary Graham Hall, a children's shelter, that I think I must have went a year without cutting it. So it got pretty long. And it curled up in the back like it does now. It's not that long now, and even now it seems a little longer than normal. I don't know. My hair is kind of coarse and wavy, so it's a little bit more manageable when it's shorter. But just an instance of immaturity, though, you see. And I could probably think of other instances too. But anyway, The Power of Maturity. You might want to get this book. There's other gems of wisdom in it. All right. So anyway, hope you enjoyed this video. Give me a thumbs up if you like it. Share it with your friends. Remember, you are a piece of art. You're a work in process, in progress. God isn't finished with you yet, whether you're a Christian or you're still an unbeliever. But let me encourage you to seek God. If you don't know God, seek Him, okay? Seek Him with your whole heart. Read the scriptures. Ponder your mortality. Yes, you will die someday, as it says in Hebrews 9:27, as it is appointed unto man once to die, but after this is the judgment. And realize that God desires fruit from your life. Fruit. And that fruit that endures forever can only be the result of the work of Christ in you. The fruit of the Spirit, which comes from the new man as a result of being washed from your sins, purified by faith, having your heart purified by faith, being born again or regenerated by the Holy Spirit. This is where really development begins, transformation begins, in the truest sense of the word. That's where true change for the betterment begins, when you become born again and you become part of God's kingdom. So many books today that are humanistic, they talk about personal development and everything, but it's from a humanistic standpoint. But none of those things will bring you into a right standing with God. Understand that. As Jesus said to Nicodemus, you must be born again. Nicodemus was a Jew, probably a very moral person, had a high regard for that which is right, but he didn't know God. He was in the same state as every sinner is before they come to Christ. All right. Well, I hope you enjoy this. Until we meet again, may the Lord richly bless you.